All right, guys, welcome back to part 2 of this 2-part video series. For those of you that missed part 1, I'll put a link up here in the upper right-hand corner so you can follow part 1. Part 1, we went through all of the disassembly and removing of fasteners to get ready to this point where we're going to pull off the pieces that we're going to need to clean and rebuild and replace gaskets on. What we're doing is replacing valve cover gaskets on this Vortec 5700 5.7 liter 1998 engine off of a Chevrolet K2500 Cheyenne pickup. Be the same for any of the 96 to 2000 Vortec V8s. So right now we're just going to get into removing the pieces that we left off in the previous video. Starting off with this passenger side valve cover. So again, we've got everything loosened up from the previous video. Just going to make sure she's nice and loose so that we can just pull it right out. Kind of lift up. Caddy corner it out. Now what you want to be careful of when you're pulling this out is not to damage this little vacuum fitting that's sticking out right there. And now we're going to flip over and we're going to come over to the other side. All right, guys, we're over on the driver's side and we're going to remove the intake manifold upper and lower assembly now. We've already gone around with our pry bar and made sure that we've got good movement in the front and the back of all 4 corners, so we should be good. We've cleared off any harness connections that might be getting wedged up on anything. We're just going to use our bracket here and our thermostat housing as a handle in the front. Take out the paper that you wedged in where the distributor goes. You can stick your fingers in the back. I'm going to have a helper here so that we can film this. You can usually do this as a single person job, but we're going to have 2 here just to make it easier for you guys to see the whole process. We're going to lift up and just bring it straight forward. All right. Just need to clear the hose in the front here first so that we can lift it up and out of the way. There we go. All right, and then we'll just pause it here, shift our position. All right. And now, sit it on this piece of wood for now. This is where you can stick your hand back and hold it. So now that we got this out, we can see all of the oil that's accumulated into these webbings on the casting. So what this actually tells me is we've got more than just an oil leak at the seal to the engine block. We probably also have an oil leak at the upper manifold gasket as well. And you got to remember this engine has close to 400,000 miles on it. So that is not entirely surprising. So if we go back inside the engine now, we can see that our gaskets came off with the intake manifold because we don't feel them on here. We didn't get any gook or debris of any significance inside the valley, but we got a lot of cleaning to do. We'll go ahead and unscrew our fuel filler cap now. We can let these bungees off and we'll take off our driver's side valve cover, and then we'll start the tedious process of cleaning, getting all of the old sealant off of both ends of the block and the mating surfaces for the gaskets. So we won't show that because that's pretty straightforward and basic stuff. But given the leak we got over here, we'll set this guy aside and take a few more close inspections. If we end up figuring out that we have to pull this, I will show disassembling the upper intake manifold. All right, guys, we've retrieved the gaskets from the bottom of this intake manifold section. And they're not in too bad a shape in terms of being fairly rigid. This repair was done probably 10 years ago. So I'm guessing our failure was here at the softer joint with the sealant rather than the hard joint with the gaskets. Although what I did notice is that the alignment tabs that you have here have broken off inside the cylinder head, so we'll have to fish those off. So it's definitely a little bit of heat damage as far as that goes. If we tilt our assembly up, and when you do, you're going to have some coolant, maybe even some fuel run out the back. You know, we can see our fuel injectors. This is the original type of fuel injection spider. It has not been upgraded, so this is how it would have come new in 1998. We don't see any real significant problems here other than a lot of carbon buildup that we'll clean out. When we take a look at the mating surfaces, You know, there's no gouges, there's no cuts, there's no grooves, there's no obvious reason why this failed, but clearly it did. Similarly down here on the bottom, same thing. You can feel with your finger, you know, you have absolutely no scratches, cuts, or grooves anywhere. And the sealant came off fairly clean onto the block. There's hardly nothing that's stuck to the actual manifold piece. When we look at the front area, so, you know, if we were leaking down here, we're trying to explain why do we have all this oil coming up all the way up to where this temperature sensor is. And then we also have a lot of this oil flaring up over here. Now you'd think, well, if that's oozing out here and getting blown back by the fan, that's one possible explanation. Another explanation would be that, like I was saying earlier, we may have a leak at the upper manifold gasket to some degree running down to explain how are we getting oil behind the thermostat housing coming down here. So I'm more and more thinking we're going to need to take this apart and change the upper manifold gasket as well. As we look along the side, we see other possible symptoms, right? There's all of this is very fresh oil running down. Now the oil's not going to run up, right? So if you've got a leak at the valve cover, you've got a leak along this edge, you may have it running down the front or the back, but you're not going to have it going against the laws of gravity here. So again, it feels like we have a problem with the upper as well. Similarly, if we take a look at the back here, we can't see it all here anymore, but when we first took this out, we had oil puddled in the webbings. So there's a possibility that could have been oozing up from a failed distributor gasket. Possibility, you know, there's a remote possibility of that, but the fact that we see the oil all back here and we have wetness all along in a couple of places here, it's not as bad as I would have thought for the pooling. And again, still leans me to maybe we should just replace the upper gasket as well. This side, this would be the driver's side. We'll be careful while we're sliding this around that we don't break this little vacuum tube over here. So just be mindful of that as you're manipulating this component. Don't really see anything. This is all dry road dirt, dust, kind of crud. I mean, there's a normal sheen for something with this kind of mileage, but no leaks on the driver's side. So it's leaking in the front passenger side corner. It's leaking in several places along the entire passenger side, and then it's leaking in a couple of places in the rear. So I think we're just going to go ahead and go for broke and swap the whole thing out. To do that, we're going to need to remove these additional 10 millimeter studs all the way around. This black piece of plastic is going to come off the aluminum. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start removing those. I'm not necessarily going to show all of this because it's pretty straightforward stuff, right? It's just lefty-loosey on all of these. But as you take them out, I'll just take one of them out here to show you what we've got. They're threaded studs because in many cases there will be a nut like we saw in the first video retaining some bracket or some harness type retainer or something will be on here that'll be held down, and then the rest of it is like a normal bolt. They're pretty long, as you can see. Probably should have grabbed the electric ratchet, but this is the deal, what they are, right? So you've got a washer, and then you've kind of got this captive bolt head, and then he's got a stud on top to handling, taking all those nuts. So I'm going to go ahead and remove these all the way around the perimeter. The other thing we'll have to do to get this separated out, I'm going to have to remove these two nuts here and remove the fuel rail. I'm pretty sure, we'll see, we'll have to take off the throttle cable bracket. There's a 10 millimeter here, and then one of those 10 millimeter nuts on one of the studs we have to take out anyway. Here's another one of these 10 millimeter nuts holding this wire harness retainer on another one of those studs. We'll end up having to take the nuts off for this PCV piece here, and then that'll allow us to remove the sensor component, and then we'll be able to remove the studs and the stud right there in the back. This guy can stay. The throttle body obviously can stay. So let me get it further disassembled, come back and show you where it's at, and then we'll pop it open. All right, guys, let me show you where we're at. So we've gone around and we've pulled all of these 10 millimeter studs out. There's also one 10 millimeter bolt on the back, and there's another one that holds the fuel line guy down here. We've kept our ones that are attached to various accessories together so we don't lose nuts and stuff like that. This guy was held on by two 8mm versions of the same thing, so that's unique for right here. He's also got a little O-ring, so when you get this off, you know, he just either press fits in or press fits out. The two nuts up here were also 8mm. In fact, we're going to go ahead and remove this retaining bracket now. And we're going to go ahead and, if we can find out what we did with our pliers, we're going to go ahead and pull that line out now. Very gently. This is also got an O-ring deal on it. Just want to be real gentle with it. I know some people like to say, yeah, just yank it out, but I'm not a fan of that. Trucks that are in the quarter century club get treated real gentle. All right, so that takes out our fuel rail. Now, there's pry points for the upper manifold here, and there's another pry point here. And as you work that up, what you're going to want to do is you're going to push down in the center because this piece stays while everything around it comes off. Right. And that's our upper manifold. And now we just confirmed our leak. You can see all this oil has been running past the upper manifold. So technically, we might have been able, you know, to speed this diagnosis up if we just took this off in the first place at diagnosing. Now, it still needs a lower manifold gasket because it's obviously leaking in both places. But now we're going to have to do the whole enchilada. So we got a lot of carbon in here as well, as you can see, several 100,000 miles worth. So what we're going to do is just a complete overhaul here. I am going to pull these spiders out. We're going to get this whole thing in the parts washer. I guess I'm going to end up now having to remove the thermostat housing and the EGR just so that we can get this thing down to just the bare aluminum so we can get it cleaned out super well. But that's where we're at now. I'll bring you guys back when we get a little bit further disassembly. All right, guys, so we can see all the oil running all the way along here, particularly in this corner here. In this corner here. All right, guys, to get the spiders out, even though they're caked up with carbon here, there's little squeezy prongs that you squeeze to get them out of the cylinder areas. So we're going to want to get all these out so we can get this guy cleaned up. You can barely see the twisties with all this crud. I am super surprised that the old girl wasn't misfiring on us. But we'll get these all out, work the whole assembly out. We'll go ahead and mark these just so we don't get them mixed up. Because, you know, even though you can't mix up more than any two, right? Because you can't mix up all of them, but any two you might be able to mix up. So, you know, we'll want to mark which cylinder they go to. All right, we'll just keep going. We'll come back when we get the rest of it off. All right, guys, you can see the progress on cleaning the engine. We're actually done and ready to go here. One of the things I like to show you here is one of the things I use is like a popsicle stick. Is a good way to get the sticky material that is sometimes present in the actual intake chambers here. And then you can clean it out with a rag with some solvent. I like to use intake manifold cleaner or carburetor cleaner on those. You definitely don't want to squirt anything in here. Just use it on a rag and get it out that way. You can see on our front mating surface, we've got this all nice and cleaned off. This was just using a gasket scraper and a razor blade. Over here, where we had some dried up gasket material around the coolant passages, we used a carbide scraper, which is safe because everything here is cast iron. We're not dealing with anything aluminum. In the back, if we zoom in, similarly, we've got that all cleaned up. One of the other things we'll do, I'll roll it at the bottom, is go ahead and check the torque on your oil pressure fitting there. For the oil pressure sender, that can also be a source of leaks in the back. So while we're here and have access to it, we just give it a quick check to make sure it's torqued down. We got some new towels in here just because it's windy. We don't want to have any kind of debris end up in here until we're ready. We've also cleaned up with a rag with solvent the mating surfaces for the gasket for the timing rocker arm cover. Jeez. So we're all ready to go here. Let me show you where we're at with the other pieces. All right, we've got our valve covers. Here's the driver's side. We've got it all nice and cleaned off, inside and out. Got a little bit of a varnish sheen on here, but that is okay. We don't care about that. Similarly, for the passenger side, we've got this guy all cleaned up. It's a little bit of a residual label or something that was here. We don't care about cosmetic stuff like that. A little bit of paint peeling. Again, I'm not concerned about cosmetics. I'm concerned about leaks. So we've got this guy all ready to go as well. One of the things that we did when we separated the lower manifold, we ended up taking all the components off of it so that we could get it all clean, including the throttle body assembly. If you ever wonder what you need a 5.5 millimeter socket for, this is a good example. This takes a 5.5 millimeter socket to remove this particular fastener that holds the wing, is a stud for the wing nut to attach the air inlet plastic assembly that we took off at the very beginning, and then the bottom part of the bolt holds down the throttle body. We've got this PCV valve cover. Whoops. Okay, we rescued our PCV valve cover here. This guy normally just sits on here and then gets tightened down. We need a new seal, but GM doesn't sell just the seal. You have to buy the whole piece. You can try to go find some aftermarket seal. It's a special kind here, this orange type of material. It's not just a standard black rubber O-ring. I elected just to get another new one, so you'll see that when we get ready to put this together. We have still a little bit of varnishing on the inside. I mean, it's just not worth the amount of time it would take to get it all off. If you feel it, what you can feel is there's very hardened, crystallized carbon deposits in some areas, right? Where it's black and smooth, there's nothing. Where it's smooth and kind of copper colored, it's just varnish. But where it's smooth and rough, it's just really hard, baked on carbon deposits. And like I said, this engine's coming up on about 400,000 miles, so that's as good as we're going to get it with a parts cleaner and even with the manual brush. We'd have to get something to scrape it, and if we scrape it, we're going to damage the plastic. We're going to make grooves in it, which is going to attract the material again. What we want to make sure of mostly is that we get a nice, smooth, super smooth surface rather, where the gasket's going to go all around the perimeter, because that's going to help with our leak problem. And then the throttle body, we've got him all cleaned up. Right, so he's in great shape. He was all completely black when we started off, and now we got him nice and shiny, so that's what we want to see there. Again, you got to use special kinds of solvent here, otherwise you'll damage the throttle position sensor or the idle air control. So I'm only using solvents that are designed for cleaning throttle bodies or carburetors. No brake clean or anything like that for this particular job. So at this point, we've got our NOS parts here. We're almost ready to start reinstalling everything. I'll show you the last piece we've got. All right, guys, this is the last thing we've got, which is to clean the lower manifold assembly. When I last showed it to you, I talked about marking the fuel injector lines that were going to the outer ends, whether it be these two outer ones here or these two outer ones here. So we're ready to pull this assembly off. This bracket here is like a snap kind of clip, so you can just take a flathead screwdriver, and again, it's old, very gingerly work the tabs off, applying pressure as you go. That side's almost out. Okay, that side's almost out. Trying to leave these in here until we get it largely loosened up so that we don't end up getting it full of crud. But it looks like we're going to have to. So I'm just going to give them a squeeze and pull them out. I mean, they are just filthy. Filthy, filthy, filthy. All right, and we're just going to lay this guy over here for now. All right, now we've got what's left here. Just to show you what we were looking at earlier when we first took this guy out. This was kind of still liquid. You can see how it's already kind of started to gel up. It's just a combination of oil and carbon buildup getting in here. So let's move to the front now. Take off our thermostat housing and our EGR. And I can show you what we found going on there. So when I went to get the size for the EGR, which is a 10 millimeter, one of the things I noticed was it looked loose. And so I went back and tried to torque it. This is a 30 Newton meter torque. That one torques fine. This one won't torque. And so what I think we've got going on down here is a stripped out bolt on top of everything else we're dealing with. So let's go see if we can confirm that. Yeah, so this guy, the bolt looks okay, but he's definitely not torquing down. So I'll have to get a flashlight in there, but I think we're going to find that she is stripped out internally in the threads. That's not a disaster. I mean, it's aluminum, so we can put a helicoil on it. Let's just see real quick what size bolt this is. Maybe a M8125. Yeah, it's definitely not a 1. Feels like it's a 125. Yep. All right, so we can put a helicoil in here and deal with that. But that's just going to delay. It's one more piece of work that I didn't want to do. There's our old EGR gasket that we can discard. All right, let's go ahead and get this off, and then I'll start cleaning all this up, and then we'll see what we're going to do about the stripped off bolt opening there. All right, let's get these off of here. While we're in here, you might as well replace the thermostat, because it is the original USA made one from 24 years ago. Guarantee you we won't be able to get an American one again, but at least we'll get a new one on here. All right, at this point, we are ready to start the tedious job of cleaning all of this gook out of here. I mean, you guys can see it's just caked on here. I don't even think I'm going to put this in the parts washer, because what I found was the solvent really doesn't do that great of a job on this material. It's better just to scrape it all off first and then spray the solvent on and do it by hand. But that's what I'm going to be doing. All right, guys, you can see the result of our cleaning. I'd say 80%, maybe 75%, the parts washer, and then the rest getting in here with a brass brush and a nylon brush, and using various cleaners. You know, at this point, it's almost like cleaning the barbecue grill, getting all of this carbon off of here. But once you get down to this kind of gold varnish sheen, that's as good as you need to go. I mean, it's not worth the effort to go further. There's bits and pieces that we, had a difficult time getting the tools in to cut down as far as we might have liked. But that's okay, right? It's almost 400,000 miles. It's in a lot better shape than it was before. On the front here, if I turn it around a little bit, we went ahead and we fixed that strip problem. We dropped an M8 by 1.25 helicoil in there to fix that problem. So now we'll be able to get the proper torque for the EGR valve. We cleaned up the mating surface here. We cleaned up the mating surface here. We went ahead and flushed water through all of the coolant passages just in case any of the chemicals had gotten in here. We obviously did not submerge or get the sensor exposed to any of these solvents, so we didn't actually put the whole thing in the washer. We kind of did one half, and we kind of did 1/4. We didn't get any solvent inside these EGR outlets either, but we wire brushed them with pipe brushes to get all the carbon out of there. All of this material is just a combination of exhaust gases that are coming up through this pollution control system, as well as oil coming in from this side and running in from the PCV system, and that stuff just gets coagulated with heat, and over time it accumulates, and this is what you get. The bottom side, right, we've got our mating surfaces cleaned up. We've also cleaned inside to a similar degree. I know the light might be preventing some of it, but it's largely that varnish look like you see here, right? There may be a few places where it's a little thicker. That's nothing to be concerned about. It's all cosmetic at this point. And similarly, we can probably look down the throats of these as well. So at this point, we're ready to get her back on and put her back inside the engine and start the reassembly process. This was the last thing we needed to get cleaned. So let's take a look at some pages from the service manual. All right, guys, I'm just going to cover some specifics on the intake manifold installation. This is the lower manifold installation. So here's a shot of the gasket. They're talking about a section of the gasket that should be exposed to a sealant, and they're talking about a particular part number here, 123464141. That's long discontinued. So what we're going to be using is something a lot more modern, 123785521, which is the current modern AC Delco engine sealant. Comes in a preloaded canister like this that you drop into a caulking gun and put it out that way. So we'll be using that to cover the material, but we'll still be following the guidance on the width of the strip that you do and how far it goes over the gasket. The gasket is the same number, I think, might be the same number, might be nearer, I don't know. Part number 89017465. So these would be our replacement gaskets. And then just to kind of show this same kind of view that they're talking about here, right? So they're showing these kind of like teeth on this rubber here, and that's what they're talking about right there. You can see through the cellophane here. So that's the part they're telling us that we want to get some of this sealant onto after we position it. These gaskets have a, we can see them through the cellophane. They've got a couple of alignment pins, right? There's one here that goes into the cylinder head, and one here that helps snap them into position. Here they show you how that strip should be laid down in the front, and they're telling you after you lay down a 5mm wide bead, they're telling you that you should then run it a 1/2 inch on top of the gasket after you install it, right? So extend the bead 1/2 inch into each lower intake manifold gasket. So that's what you have to do to try to avoid these leaks. The other thing here is a shot in the back, same thing, 5mm wide. Here's where the oil pressure sensor goes in, right? So it runs along right at the front of that, not behind it. And then when you get to actually putting the fasteners back in, they talk about applying a thread lock, a 123-45382, which is this, 123-45382. All this is medium strength blue Loctite type of product, but whichever's cheaper, you can use the GM or the actual OEM, whichever you can find cheaper. That's all it is, medium blue. And then there's a particular sequence, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It has to be done in that sequence, and it has to be done in 3 steps. 27 inch-pounds first, 106 inch-pounds second, and the final pass to 11 foot-pounds and no more, or you'll end up cracking this plastic gasket and you'll have leaks. So let's go ahead and get started laying down our sealant and dropping the lower manifold into the engine bay. All right, guys, step 1, we're going to load up some of this sealant onto the end of the gasket. Just right in there on both ends. We're going to do this on each one, but I'll show you this one. And then we're just going to come in here. We're going to position these pins into the holes in the cylinder head. All right, we got that one. And we're going to do the same thing on the other one. You want to put this on the side that has the pin. You want to try to line the holes up first shot as best you can so that you don't get any smearing. That one went in perfect. Now we're going to come in the front and lay the bead down that they want us to lay in the front. They want us to do, well, let's see if we can get the flashlight to another home. So we're going to come up a 1/2 inch, right about there. Position myself over here. Okay, then we're going to do the same thing in the back. I'm going to have to block your view for that, but the same deal. All right, guys, I'm going to come up on top of the engine here, and we're going to slide this guy down into position, and we're just going to build it up on the engine since we had to take the whole thing apart. And I'm going to have a helper here. Go ahead and take that, slide it under these harnesses. It's getting caught right there in the back there. Just make sure you don't touch the sealant. Keep it up. Okay, we're going to want to work this guy up and over. Move your hand, your right hand. Okay, yep, we're in position here. Now you're going to want to slide. This has to stay down. You're going to slide that that way. Okay, we are good in the front. How are we in the back? All right, so slowly let her down. We use our dowel to make sure we're lined up. And there we go. Nice, smooth drop, all lined up, ready to put the bolts in. So let's go grab our bolts and put some Loctite on them and start torquing them. All right, guys, we've got this in. We've got it all torqued down with a 3-step process that I showed you in the service manual. Remember, the first step is going to be the 27 inch-pounds. Then the second step is the 106. And the last step is the 11 foot-pounds. It's that much. Don't do anything more or you will squish this plastic gasket and you'll be taking this all off and doing it over. Remember, you got to do it in this order. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This is the front, right? There's normally where your throttle body would sit. There's your purge solenoid. There's your fuel lines, fuel rail, whatever you want to call it, coming into your spider assembly. Up here on the top, you can see your temperature sensor. Right here would be your thermostat, right? So this is the front of the vehicle. This is the back of the vehicle. All right, so now we're ready to continue assembling. Like I said, because we had this turn into a complete rebuild of the intake manifold assembly, we're just going to build it back right on the block. The next thing we're going to put in is a 12632948. That's an AC Delco 131 151. And what this is our new thermostat. And the old one was not giving us any trouble, but it was 24 years old. So we're in here, so we're going to go ahead and replace it. So we'll put that guy on there. I'll get the bolts, and I'll give you the torque in a moment. The next thing we're going to go do is a 125-55896 GM number, AC Delco 219-197. This is our new EGR valve gasket. And what you want to do on this guy is this piece here should move, right? See how that moves with your finger? Just want to make sure that you get a dental pick. Don't go in here too far, but just make sure you get any small buildup of carbon around here just while you're in here again, so this guy can move nice and good. And you want to make sure when you assemble him, it's easy to get this thing backwards, right? You want to make sure that it goes in this orientation with the plug towards the passenger side. So we'll get that back in with our two 10mm bolts. I'll come back and give you the torque on that. We'll get these hoses hooked up. We'll get the this 10mm bolt back here. We'll get our idler pulley back here. We'll get our coolant lines back in. We'll get our bracket for our compressor and power steering back in. And we'll get our valve covers back in. So stay tuned. All right, guys, next thing we're going to put on are valve covers. And we're going to need to put new gaskets on those. And that's going to be a 146-089. Just going to pop these right into the recessed area of the cover all the way around. Reposition them on the engine. Get your 4 bolts in. When I come back, I'll give you the torque value. All right, guys, you can see we're progressing on the reassembly. We've got some shop towels in some of these ports because it's kind of windy out here. We don't want to have anything end up in there until we're all done. So we got our thermostat and thermostat cover on. That throws 213mm or 18 foot-pounds of torque. We got our EGR valve back on. That was a 2-step process. We originally came down with 88 inch-pounds on the first pass, and then the final pass on those two 10mm is 22 foot-pounds. We got our AC compressor bracket and power steering pump bracket back on. The 14mm bolts are all 30 foot-pounds. The E8 stud is 15 foot-pounds, and then the 14mm nut is 30 foot-pounds. And then the 15mm nut on the back side, that is 37 foot-pounds, but you're never going to get anything in there. There's no room for a torque wrench, so that's going to have to be good and tight. When we take a look at the valve covers, that's 106 inch-pounds on all 4 10mm on each valve cover. The idler pulley right here, this guy's 37 foot-pounds on that 13mm. Can't see it too well, but our EGR pipe, the fitting, the 22mm fitting is 18 foot-pounds, so you need a crowfoot on there. And then all the way in the back, the 13mm at the back of the pipe, that guy's also 18 foot-pounds. Our AC compressor itself, these 4 bolts, the 13mm, they're 37 foot-pounds. The bracket on the side with the 113mm that's over here, that's 18 foot-pounds. And I think that is, oh, there's one more, this little cooling line retaining bolt, 10mm, 106 inch-pounds. We've got our fan shroud back on. These 10mm I don't recommend you torquing. It's 71 inch-pounds, but you know, this plastic's very old. It's more likely to crack. I would just snug them up rather than try to actually torque them. All right, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put the distributor in, and we'll go through those changes because ours had some problems, and then we'll be ready to do the upper intake manifold assembly. All right, guys, it's time to put the distributor back in. We got a few things that I pointed out when we took it out, right? We had all of this black charring in here, so it's definitely time to replace the rotor. We also have some corrosion and some charring on the actual tip, right? So these things, they don't last forever, so we're going to have to replace this. We showed also on the cap, there are 2 screws. We showed that the little ball here that's supposed to be in there has come off, and then we've also got corrosion on all the firing pins. So all those parts need to be replaced. When you go through the service manual, they do tell you that you discard the mounting bolts. I mentioned when we took it apart that we're going to have to change those out. And some other things we'll point out in here, we're going to have to install a new distributor gasket onto the distributor. The other thing to point out is I'll show you in a minute, there's a flat part of the distributor, if it's the original GM, and that faces the front of the vehicle towards the radiator, flat part towards the radiator. Other than that, we'll use the little alignment marks we made with the paint. Some torque values for when you get in here later. You're going to have 18 foot-pounds on the bolt that holds the retaining clamp, but do not torque it down until after we do the step at the end with the scan tool to make sure that the timing is correct. Just snug it until we get to that point. The the two screws, the two new screws that hold the cap on, are 21 inch-pounds. Don't do any more than that. You'll strip it out. And then I think back here, a couple more things. The two screws that hold the rotor in are 17 inch-pounds. So these part numbers that we're going to be using, 1010 8445 is the distributor shaft gasket. You know, these come in like a bag of several, so if you only need one, you'll end up just getting it loose like this. Our replacement rotor is a GM 104 52 457, and that's a Delco D465. And what you'll get in the box with the rotor is you'll get a little pack of screws, 2 short ones for the rotor, 2 long ones for the distributor cap. And again, they're slightly oversized from the original ones if you've replaced the distributor at any point. And then a replacement distributor cap is a GM 104 52 459 or a Delco D329A. And this guy also will come with a couple of screws. And there's our ball crimped in where it's supposed to be. Our firing pins are all nice and clean, so that'll be going on as well. We're going to go ahead and install it with the old rotor because that's where our paint marks are. Right, so if you remember when we took it off, we did a paint mark here and we've held this in position. We also did a paint mark along the base right there. So that'll be what we use to align. So we're going to just clean the groove point for the clamp and the distributor face. We're going to check the gears down here to make sure there's no debris. Like right there, there's a little piece of crud that has gotten in there as part of the removal process. We'll clean all that out, but we're not going to parts wash this guy. We want to make sure we don't spin him or change his orientation at all. It'd be real easy to get this thing out of whack. So clean it up. We're going to put it in. I'll show it after we've reinstalled it, and we'll pick up from there. All right, guys, we got the distributor placed in like we did earlier. We've cleaned up our clamp and our bolt, and like I said, we're just going to snug it up. We're not going to torque it. We're just going to get it snug enough so that we can start it up and see where our timing lands on the Tech 2. All right, guys, we got a new gasket that goes on this evap component right here. So we're going to get a pick and fish the old one off. A little bit of throttle cleaner and clean up around that. And then the replacement gaskets are a 104 90666. Fish one of these out. This way we have a nice good vacuum seal when we pull this back together again. Just make sure you get any grease you have off of it. And then when this goes on to our upper intake, we'll put some oil, some fresh motor oil around it to lubricate it before we put it in. And then, of course, we've got our 2 fasteners that are going to hold this onto the lower and then also help hold this and the lower on, this onto the upper and hold both of them onto the lower manifold. All right, guys, at this point, we are ready to reassemble the pieces of the upper manifold so that we can get this back on the lower manifold. So I'm just going to start putting pieces together here, and I'll explain to you what we're replacing as we go. So we'll start off with this guy. So remember, we had this PCV valve cover that goes here, and we wanted to get a new seal because this one is shot and it's letting oil leak. But they don't sell you just the seal. You got to buy the whole piece. So that's just how it is. So I have got a new one of these, which for this particular Vortec V8 5.7 liter, it's part number 12552752. So we're just going to put that guy on there, and what we're going to do to ease the assembly on these pieces is we got a little bit of just some clean motor oil and a Q-tip, and we're just going to kind of lubricate the inner bore of each of these pieces that we're putting together in the plastic. The way this guy goes on, he just fits like this and twists after you get him in there. Just like that. So these little pieces lock together. All right, the next guy we've got is we have our pressure sensor. Now, normally, something like this just comes right out. And this guy came out like 3/4 of the way, and then he separated. It's just, you know, he's 24 years old. That's what's going to happen. So this original part, 162499939, has been discontinued for a long, long time, and it has gone through several super sessions. But the current replacement is a 194188808. If we open this guy up, we see it's just a new one of these, just the current iteration of the design. And similar to what we did over there, we're just going to put some clean motor oil into the bore area to ease the assembly. And then we're just going to slide this guy into position just like that. He normally just slides on and off without any drama. But for some reason, the other one had gotten wedged in there and kind of like dried on, if you will. All right, the next part we used to have, we used to have this vacuum fitting sitting up here. Remember, we took this off; it broke off, so we had to get a replacement one of those too. That is going to be a 1260245. This is another superseded part. It's a little bit of a different design from the old one. So we can see the biggest difference is that the nipple is angled versus the old one was at 90 degrees. This is a little bit less. So other than that, it's the same. So just like we did on the other pieces, we're going to take some clean motor oil and ease the assembly of the bore. Now we can see how this piece goes compared to the one it broke off, right? We've got these two pieces here. We're just going to stick it in to the slotted area. And then we're going to turn it until it locks in position. So you can see over here it's able to turn. We want to get this in the best alignment for us. Trying to see which would be the best alignment for us. I kind of want to get it to where it locks into the piece right here. Not real happy with the new angle that this guy has because the old one locked in more straight back, but that's how this guy is. And if we wanted to get him off, we would push him and twist him off, which should have happened on the first one. It should have just twisted off. He's on there now. We're just going to leave him. The next thing we're going to pull off are these studs that we temporarily put here for the throttle body, because we're going to need to put a new gasket in here, and we're going to need to put some thread sealant on these. All right, so the gasket is going to be a part 17113206. It's going to have all three of the gaskets that we will need to complete this reassembly. Starting with this one. Just want to make sure he fits into the grooved area correctly. Just take the extra time to make sure this is fully seated all the way around. Otherwise, it's going to bind up or flatten out as you do it. Now on the bottom, there are 15 millimeter headed threaded inserts that fit into here. So as we tighten this guy up, again, just checking on to make sure he's going to be fitting okay. Then we're going to bring our throttle body, set him on top. Again, right, just a good idea to check this guy all the way around so everything is sitting just the way it should. And then we're going to take a little bit of our 12345382, which is our thread locker blue, on the part that actually hits the threaded insert. hand tighten that one. I'm going to do the same for these guys on the front here. And then what we're going to do is torque all three of these fasteners down, the two 10 millimeters in the front and the 5.5 or 5.5 if you like, millimeter stud in the back. We're going to torque them down to 80 inch-pounds. Just like to get them snugged up by hand first. Okay, let's grab our torque wrench and torque them down. So we'll grab our 5.5 and our 10 socket. Do our 5.5 first. Again, 80 inch-pounds. There's that. Switch to our 10. At this point, once we get these other two torqued, we are ready to put this guy on top of the lower. Almost done. That's it for that. All right, folks, last thing is the bottom body gasket. So flip her over. Now, if when you were doing that torquing, if it moved on you, you could put a 15 millimeter on here like I was saying and hold that into position until you completed that step. Okay, so just like the other gasket, we're just going to get it started by hand so that everything fits in the grooves the way it's supposed to. Okay, then we're just going to go around, make sure it's all snapped in all the way around. And then we'll be ready to put the fasteners that hold this onto the lower and get them torqued down into position. Okay, this assembly is ready to go. All right, guys, it's time to install our fuel meter body assembly and our fuel injectors. I'm going to take out the plugs that we've used to keep dirt and debris out of those holes. And then we're going to take our assembly. Now you can see here I elected to rebuild this CSFI assembly, and if you're interested in going through that kind of rebuild process, I'll put a link up in the upper area of the video right here. You can tap on the white circle with the little eye in it, and that'll take you into what I did there. So we're just going to bend our lines like this, and we're just going to very carefully, because we don't want to get any dirt on the ends of these injectors, we're going to slide the whole thing back into the bracket and get it snapped in just like that. And then, like we showed earlier, we've got our numbers right here on the front. So here's number 2 and here's number 4. And so we can come over here and we can put number 4 in. And then we can come over here and put, actually, you know what I'll do, because on these V8 ones, they cross over. So what I'll do is I'll put 2 in first. And then I'll put 4 in second. All right, and so we'll go through and do the same thing over here. We've got 3 and 1. So we'll do 1. And we'll do 3. Just want to make extra attention that you're getting these where they go. And make sure your bracket, I should have mentioned, make sure your bracket is, the bolt here on the bottom is a T30 Torx. Make sure he's torqued to 88 inch-pounds. 88 inch-pounds. There is a little bit of play on this for seating with the upper manifold body, but there shouldn't be much, right? Just a little bit like you see here. You know, it just wiggles a little bit. But you want to make sure that you have that torque down. All right, and we'll go do 8 and 6 in the back and 7 and 5, and we'll be ready to put the upper cover on. All right, guys, we've got this in. We're all set. Kind of zoom in a little bit here. We can see down here we've got 4 and 2. And then over here on this side, I don't know if we can get a good angle with the way that the hoses are here in your way, but we've got 3. Right here we've got 3 and we've got 1. And then the back we've got 6 and 8 over on this side. And then over on the driver's side we've got 7 and 5. So now we're ready to put the top cover of the body on for the upper intake manifold. All right, guys, we are almost ready to fire the engine up. I'm sorry we had a camera glitch earlier, and I didn't get to show one thing I did want to show you, which is right before we put the upper manifold plastic housing on, there is a blue gasket that goes around the fuel meter body that we'll want to put clean engine oil on before we slide this guy down, and you'll want to make sure that gets seated well before you start putting the fasteners in. These 10 millimeter fasteners here, these guys are the ones you'd put in first all the way around. And remember that they're studs except in the very back in front of the distributor cap. The one right in front of the distributor cap is going to be just a regular 10 millimeter. The two 8 millimeters get used on our evap purge solenoid here, and these guys get torqued down to 89 inch-pounds. The torque on the 10s is a 2-step process. You're going to go all the way around and torque them in one phase to 44 inch-pounds and then a final phase to 89 inch-pounds. Once you have all of the fasteners around the upper manifold torqued to 89 inch-pounds, then we can install our coil module. The 2 stud bolts that hold that down go to 106 inch-pounds, and then the nuts that hold the wiring harness bracket also get 106 inch-pounds. The bracket that holds our throttle and cruise control cable, the bolt and the nut are 106 inch-pounds right there, and also the 2 nuts with the 2 brackets on the opposite side are 106 inch-pounds, as well as the one over here with the wire loom retainer. Also, that nut's 106 inch-pounds. Remember, the smaller nut goes on the smaller bracket, and the larger nut goes on the larger bracket. At this point, we've got everything ready to go here. As you can see, we've reconnected all of our electrical connections. You want to make sure that I'm going to have to pop this guy in and lock him into place. You want to make sure that things are snapping in correctly here. We might have a little bit of tweaking on the evap line routing. Got a few more tweaks like that. Power brake hose, we just still need to put our clamp on. We've got it hooked up though, so just a couple more minor things. I'll show you the last thing we've got left before we give her a firing. All right, guys, remember as you put those 10 millimeter studs and bolts in for the upper intake, you're going to have to give them the blue Loctite treatment, or the blue thread locker treatment, similar to what we've done elsewhere. Same for the 2 8 millimeter ones that are holding down the evap solenoid. The last thing we've got left is our fuel line piece. We're going to put some light engine oil on the tip here to help guide it in, and then we'll be able to torque down our 2 nuts with our retainer to pull it into place. On the back side here, it also has a 10 millimeter bolt that we're going to need to put blue Loctite on and torque that down. I'll give those torque values on both of those when we come back. On the very back, in the back with the lines in the back here, probably can't get you a good view from here, but we have to put on new O-rings. And so that'll be GM part number 19258137 for the smaller one. And that'll be GM 225-14722 is the GM number, or AC Delco 217452 for the larger size. Just turns out that this one doesn't have a Delco number, but the larger one does. We'll get those 2 O-rings on in the back. We'll go ahead and lubricate that with clean oil before we start them into here. and then we'll get our 10 on, and we'll get these guys torqued down. Again, I'll give you all those when I come back. All right, guys, we got our fuel line assembly in. Just wanted to show you a couple of tips from the service manual, right? There's a whole bunch of bold point here. Very important that those O-ring seals on the inlet and the outlet get lubricated with clean engine oil so that when they swell up, which they normally do, you don't get leaks. Also, a few drops of engine oil to the male ends as they slide into the plastic retainers. You're going to end up going 53 inch-pounds on the 10 millimeter bolt in the back. Remember to use some blue thread locker on that. And we're going to go 27 inch-pounds on the two nuts that hold the pipes in position. And then on the very back with the fittings, we're going to tighten those to 22 foot-pounds. You're going to use a crowfoot line type wrench at 16 millimeters to do that job. And that is going to be the last of the torque values I need to give you. The next step up will be to put the air cleaner assembly back on, put our PVC lines back on, and we'll take a look underneath before we get everything ready to fire up. All right, guys, we got everything put back together. We were talking about the torque on our inlet and outlet fuel lines, right? So we've got those in position with our two nuts and our clamp holding down those two pieces. Of course, we got our 10 millimeter in the back. We got our two fittings on, and we've torqued those down as well. We've got our PCV lines in, we've got our evap line properly routed and everything connected at both ends, and we've got our air intake assembly that comes over from our air cleaner all buttoned back down. We've got our clamp by the mass airflow sensor back in position, and we've got our hose into the passenger side valve cover ready. So at this point, everything's reassembled and we're ready to fire it up. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the procedure around setting the cam retard adjustment on the distributor, because even with the paint marks, it's usually going to be a little off. All right, guys, the very last thing before this is all finally done with is the camshaft retard offset adjustment. So when we start up the engine for the first time, and even though we did our paint marks, more than likely we could be off a degree or two. And this is how you do that adjustment. You're going to end up with the engine off. You're going to tighten this guy down if you haven't already. And then you're going to rev it up to 1,000 RPMs with your Tech 2 or similar scan tool connected. Only these higher-end scan tools are going to give you this particular reading. Can't use a code reader or anything like that. And you're going to make sure that you have 0 degrees. And you probably don't. And the way you make that adjustment is you shut the engine off, loosen the bolt, turn it towards the driver's side to make it more negative, turn it towards the passenger side to make it more positive. You're just going to turn the whole housing. You don't need to disconnect any of the spark plug wires or anything. You're just going to loosen this guy up, and you're going to either turn it, like you see in the picture here, you're going to turn it this way for negative or this way for positive. The kind of adjustments you're doing is about the width of a penny. Think about the width of a penny. Roughly, or excuse me, maybe a width of a nickel. That's probably more accurate. The width of a nickel is probably going to be moving several degrees at a time. So it's not a whole lot that you'll need to do. Tighten it back down, start the engine up, recheck, and keep doing this over and over again until you get a value of 0 degrees at 1,000 RPMs. Once you do that, then take the bolt and torque it down to 25 foot-pounds. It's a real bear to get in there with a torque wrench. You'll have to use a combination of different tools. What I ended up using was a 13 millimeter line type crowfoot and a couple of extensions and swivels, but eventually got it in there where we could do what we needed to do. So let's go see how it looks on the scan tool. All right, guys, the first time you're going to start it up, you're going to do 3 or 4 of these long key on, key off cycles. And what that's going to do is that's going to prime the fuel pressure, purge all the air out of the fuel meter body since we have rebuilt that. If you didn't rebuild it, then you might be able to get away with just doing this once or twice. And then the very first time you do this, you're going to have a long extended crank. Now we've already started it up once, so this is back to normal, but just showing you we got no codes over here. We're going to jump right into the Tech 2, and we're going to show what we were talking about with the service manual. So we're going to get into building the vehicle. And you can use an MDI or some other high-end scan tool. It's going to have to be something that shows this particular type of information. K for speed, 3/4 ton, data display, engine data 1. And then we're going to scroll down to that value way down here. Right there, CMP retard. Now right now it's showing negative 45, but we're going to have to take it up to 1,000 RPMs. And we see at 1,000 RPMs, we're 0. And that's where we're supposed to be, right? So you just want to kind of hold it at 1,000 RPMs. It's kind of hard to do with your foot there. And you can use the scan tool to help make sure you've got it where you want it. Go back at the top here in engine data. So we got it like 1019, 1015. This is probably as close as we're going to get by foot. And we're dead on the money. So when we first fired this guy up, we were at negative 3 degrees. So it was just a minor hair adjustment. Somewhere between the width of a penny and a nickel, got it spot on. Let off the gas and back to normal idle, and we should be sitting around 700. Just to make sure, yeah, 630, 640, so just around 700 RPMs. You know, for something that's got 383,000 miles on it, that's very good. So at this point, guys, we are done. This was a 2-part, long epic video. I hope this taught you something. I hope it helped you get your job done. A lot of parts, a lot of detail, a lot of torque values, a lot of tips along the way, a lot of cleaning, a lot of decarbonization. So leave some comments below if you got questions, or if you got other ways you did some of the steps you saw in this video. If you found anything useful, or you found you saved some money here and it saved you some time, hit that like button. It's the most important thing you could do as a give back. And as always, thanks for watching.